Question 7. Looking back at your preliminary task, what do you feel you have learnt in the progression from it to the full product? In the preliminary task, my magazine had a very basic design and was not very detailed, as I had not learnt many skills to use for it. For example, the colours I used on my front cover were not very eye-catching and did not stand out very well against the background. This was not good, as the front cover of a magazine needs to attract readers and all the text should be easily visible. For example, I used a darkish blue colour for my masthead against a dark background. This meant that it was not very visible, which was not good, as the masthead should be the first thing a reader notices about a magazine. Therefore, I put more thought into the colour scheme of my final magazine and ensured the colours were vibrant and attractive, whilst also working well with the rest of the page, for example, complementing the colours in the images. The main colours I chose for my final magazine were blue, white, yellow and red. I chose these colours as they are eye-catching and complement each other well. Similarly, my font choices for the masthead and cover lines were not very effective and looked very simple. In the peer assessment feedback I received, it said I needed to use a wider range of fonts. I considered this and used approximately 9 different fonts in my final magazine, as opposed to the 3 I used in the preliminary task. This provided my magazine with variety, whilst also keeping a clear house style. I also ensured that all my fonts were appropriate for the genre and for my target audience. I did this by using a mixture of big heavy fonts for headlines and titles to draw attention to them, and smaller lighter fonts for the body text and other more detailed items of text. This made it appropriate for my target audience, as all the fonts were easily readable and eye-catching where needed be. Another piece of feedback I got from the preliminary task was to use more locations for images. I have listened to this advice and used 7 to 8 locations in my final magazine, rather than 2 like in my preliminary piece. These locations include stadiums and arenas, award shows, shopping streets and a home environment. This made my magazine more appealing as it adds variety. Additionally, looking back on the preliminary task, I noticed that the quality of my images was not very good, as they were taken on my phone, which meant they were slightly blurred when I tried to enlarge them. Since then, I learned that to get better quality images, I needed to use a professional camera, so I ensured my final pictures were taken on a proper camera rather than on my phone. This made my magazine look more realistic and professional, as though the images had been taken on an official photo shoot. Also, throughout the 2 pages I created in the preliminary task, I only used 3 images, which were of 2 different students. I found that this didn't look very effective, as there was more focus on the text, which isn't ideal for a teenage-based audience, as they often prefer more images to look at than text. Therefore, I decided to use 9 different pictures of music artists and concerts in my final magazine to make it more appealing to my readers. I also found that in the preliminary task, the background of a schoolroom of my front cover image did not look very effective, because it was a busy background, so it drew the reader's attention away from the person in the image, which was the main feature. Therefore, for my final magazine, I learnt how to use the magic wand and quick selection tool to remove the background and replace it with a solid colour. I wanted to do this so that the cover lines were more visible, as it is easier for text to stand out against a solid coloured background, as opposed to a pattern background from an image. I also learnt more about the composition of each page. When I look back at the preliminary task, I noticed that the layout was very straightforward and plain. This was because I had stuck with the first layout I tried and did not try any other options, so there was not much variation between cover line sizes and layouts, nor was there any variation with the subheads on the contents page. Therefore, in my final piece, I chose to experiment with different layouts until I found one that looked the most eye-catching and effective.